Happy Good Friday, everyone, or Passover, whatever you might be celebrating. As promised, I want to take just a couple minutes to go over the correct answers in quiz number 4. That way you have a bit of a starting point if you're planning to write your final paper or prep for the final exam by going back to the material on Socrates. And I'm going to keep this quick because my house Wi-Fi is garbage and videos over like 2 minutes take forever for my computer to upload to YouTube. All right, let's dive in. Remember, the first section of the quiz was about, is this the Plato of Socrates, the Socrates of Plato, the Socrates of Aristophanes, or neither? Passage 1 was straight up Plato. This passage is completely made up by me, but it's based on Socrates' advice that the guardians should not be taught bad myths. For full points, you had to tell me that this related to the raising of guardian children in some capacity. Number 2, this one was my imitation of Aristophanes, clouds. In the clouds, in the passage I read for you in my video, it shows Aristophanes, Socrates saying, I don't believe in Zeus, I believe in the clouds because they're the ones who make it rain. This passage is all about an imitation of that, in which my fake Socrates imagines that wine makes people fall in love and not Aphrodite. So straight up Aristophanes. This passage was neither. In neither Plato nor Aristophanes does Socrates ever say he doesn't believe in the gods. So that would be a bit of a dead giveaway. Please forgive my dog growling in the background. And this last one, this was Plato based on the Apology. The description here of the spark of the divine was my way of hinting to you about what Socrates describes as his daimonion, his little personal god who tells him when not to do things. And for full points, you had to tell me it was the daimonion. All right, in the second part of the quiz, I asked you to think about how different historical events would have shaped the juror's opinion. These overall you did pretty good at. In some places, you kind of forgot to explain the impact on the trial or explain how Socrates' reputation might have been shaped by that historical event. So for number 5, depending on the one that you picked, I wanted you to explain Socrates' relationship with Alcibiades, i.e. that he was a teacher of Alcibiades, or emphasize that Socrates was also accused of being a sophist, that is, of using his silver tongue or speech to persuade people of bad ideas. If you pick number 2, I wanted to see you tie back into the consequences of the mutilation of the Herms, the fact that this was an act of religious blasphemy, and that many people said the Athenian failure at the Sicilian expedition was because of the mutilation of the Herms. Therefore, having Socrates be on trial for not believing in the gods might make some jurors scared or superstitious that something similar would happen. Okay, number 6. Depending on the rise of the 30 tyrants or the Athenian amnesty, for either one, I really needed you to emphasize that the sort of society that Socrates describes in the Republic is highly anti-democratic, that he's talking about taking power out of the hands of the majority and putting it into the hands of a few guardians. You could have also talked about Socrates' relationship with Critias, that he was a teacher of Critias, or you might have mentioned how the fact that the amnesty made it impossible for Athenians to charge Socrates with any crimes related to 30, so they had to potentially, in some interpretations, cook up charges about blasphemy or about corrupting the youth as a way of getting around the amnesty to charge Socrates. Lastly, this number 7 one, I thought this was the hardest of the batch. Depending on which one you picked, you could have focused on the role that Theramenes played in challenging the 30 and emphasized that Theramenes was really put to death unfairly, and that this might have made some jurors actually support Socrates. Remember, we know that he wasn't found guilty by a huge margin, but by a small one. Or you could have emphasized the opposite, that people associated Socrates with Critias, and Critias had persecuted an innocent man, maybe making some jurors turn against Socrates because of that. And if you picked option 2, I really, again, wanted you to emphasize that there is a sort of paranoia in Athens in 403 about anti-democratic sentiment, and explain that Socrates is like the most mainstream guy to challenge democracy. All right, the last two questions had to do with you interpreting passages about how Socrates views death, and in particular, whether you thought this was his true personal belief or more like philosophical propaganda to try to get his students to keep doing philosophy after he's dead. For passage number one, I thought this was much more of a propagandistic or an encouragement to Socrates' students more than genuine belief. Why do I think that? Well, first of all, there's a real penalty reward dynamic in this passage, in which Socrates is essentially saying those who do philosophy are going to have a better afterlife than those who don't. Almost a sort of heaven hell dynamic, if not that strong. And second of all, this emphasis on risk, he wants to convince his students that yes, doing philosophy might be risky, but it is worth the risk to try to believe in this afterlife and to be confident that your soul will go somewhere good after death. In this passage, I thought it was the opposite case, that this is at least a display of Socrates' more genuine beliefs. Why do I think that? Well, he recognizes that Crito is skeptical, that his student Crito doesn't really seem to be buying this whole soul afterlife nonsense. And so, in order to persuade him, Socrates really walks the talk by showing that he doesn't think his body is important, but rather his soul. And for that reason, he tells Crito, I don't care how you bury me. Bury me whatever way you think is most in accordance with custom. Not because Socrates cares about custom, but because he doesn't really care at all what happens to his body in the afterlife. Lastly, there were three bonus questions. I gave 2 points for each. A lot of people got number 2 and number 3, the workers and Aristophanes. Number 1, you really had to pick an example of Athens democracy acting in a mob mentality. So the trial of the 10 generals at Arginusae was really the prime example. You could have also had the fact that the Athenians voted for the Sicilian expedition. Those would have been prime ones. Also, finally, I promised some bonus points for my favorite songs on Spotify. There were a lot of good runners up, a lot of good choices here. And this is obviously completely subjective, so take for it what you will. In section number 1, I picked the songs of Christos, My Way. Frank Sinatra's My Way is like classic, it very much reminds me of Socrates, right? I did it my way. And Davis Karen, Throne. I'm not usually a metalhead, but I thought that the lyrics really matched this notion of Socrates leaving behind a legacy. And then in section 02, I picked 2 songs I didn't know at all. Tyler's Redemption Song by Bob Marley, very much about, again, conveying a legacy despite adversarial opponents. And Ryan's I Won't Run Away, again, a sort of fearless statement about Socrates facing down death even when faced with persecution, trial, and tribulation. All right, I've clearly gone way over 2 minutes here, but if you have any more questions about the quiz or specific wondering why you lost points or got points in some places, just shoot me an email. Have a good one.